I mean, it did, but it's not.
何事もなく。
あれマユシーの懐中止まっちゃってる。おかしいな。さっきネジ巻いたばっかりなのに。
Okay, so yeah, essentially it just kind of delayed it a bit, right? And you know, it just kind of makes a lot of sense as well, right? Because the timeline, the world line shifted again, right? Back to that trajectory in the opposite direction now. So again, if there's a change there, yeah, kind of makes sense. There might be changes, or in this case, delays. But she still died anyways. Okay. So he time leapt. Oh, this time immediately, right? Wow. Ugh. There's a reason. Yes! Yes! Maki se kurisu. Some are a bit more challenging than the others. Like the Moika one, right? Yeah. I'll call you that name again. It's an interesting dynamic, right? I'll call you Kurisu again. That's a tough one as well, though, man. Especially given that, you know... Of course. Okay, so Ferris, finally, hopefully. The writing feels so familiar. Quite the entrance or re-entrance, Ferris. I've been here before. Suzuha as well. Bro, she doesn't remember. What's that noise that I keep hearing? But she's much more like Kiyoma than the rest. I think I've been here as well before. And it didn't happen. Okay. Look at this. Whoa. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Residual. Hold on. Glitch in the Matrix? That's gotta be residual memories, man. Ha. The orange juice, the phone calls she took. Mayuri.
盛り上がったね。
Wow, this is a game changer, man.
B メールを取り消さないとどうなるにゃ。
マユリの命が危ない。
Rock in a hard place, man.
そんなの
So does she remember everything
マ
now?
ユシーの命
Or
が
just
どういうことにゃ。
glimpses?
わかるのか。教えてくれ、頼む。D メールを取り消さなきゃならないんだ。
それはできないにゃ。
どうしてマユリが死んでもいいって言うのか。
いいわけないにゃ。
Oh, it's her dad. It has to be 100%.
10年前に死んだパパ
There it is.
生き返らせたにゃ。パ
Back
パ
in
が
her
死んだ
life.
過去を
Oh,
死なないように変えたにゃ。
wow, she must be feeling devastated. The hell is this? Ugh. Let's wrap it up. Let's wrap it up. You know, I don't want it chewing into the runtime.
パパありがとう。
Yeah, get a good look, Okurin.
私が大会を見に行っていればこんなことにはならなかったのかもしれないが、
パパはお仕事だったんだから仕方ないにゃ。
ルミホ
Take it in, Okurin. This is at stake.
5100
はい。
事情があってね、橋田さんには申し訳ないことをしたが、
橋田さん、橋田すずさんですか。
Oh.
知っているのかい？ IBN5100 は彼女から渡されたんだ。
私は大丈夫。きっと IBN5100 を手に入れてみせるから。
Yeah,
すずは手に
she did.
入れてくれてたんだ。
It's good that Okurin has a confirmation, and I have a really definitive confirmation.
昔ルミホが誘拐されてね、
Rumiho.
会社が今ほど大きくない頃で身代金を用意することができた。
Ah,
そんな時 IBN5100 を
someone,
高額で
eh?
買い取りたいという人物が現れたんだよ。おかげで身代金を用意することができた。それ以来娘との約束は何があっても守ることにしてるんだよ。どんな小さなことでも、どんなことがあってもね。
パパ
No one said it's gonna be easy, Okurin. That almost looks like Okurin, but it's her dad.
10年前に死んだパパを生き返らせたにゃ。
D メールを取り消したあの人。
オカリン D メールを送るの。そんなことしたら全部消えちゃうんだよ。
でもそうしないとマユリ、お前が。
That's your curse, Okurin. I do appreciate the intimate nature of this segment of the episode
リス、
その
and the pacing of
さ
it.
っきはありがとう。今日も岡部さんがいなかったらどうなっていたかわからない。
言い直すな。いつも通りでいい。
とにかく今日も本当にありがとう。今日もはね、私の王子様だよ。
王子様。
マユシーの命が危ないって本当。10年前8歳の誕生日だ
Okay.
った。パパと一緒に遊びに行こうって約束してたの。でも仕事でダメになっちゃって仕方がなかったんだけど、寂しくて愛されてないんじゃないかって思っちゃって、パパなんかもう知らない、死んじゃえばいいんだって。そしたら
And then
それがパパとの最後の会話になっちゃった。その過去を変えたくて D メールを。
それで親父さんは事故
she sent the
お前が積極的に萌え文化を町に取り入れることもなく、秋葉は電気街のままだったというわけか。
幸せだった。10年間
I'm still thinking about her past memories or other memories leaking
来
in.
るね。パパは10年前に事故で死んでるの。それが真実。この10年間は夢。一緒に
Like a lucid dream
どれだけ愛してくれていたのかも分かった。マユシーは私の
that she must wake up from now, eh?
わがままなんか言っていられないよ。
That is quite the choice, man.
よくない。よくないよ。私、世界線が変わる前のことを思い出した。けど、変わった後のこと
Ah,
も覚えてる。
memories lived and memories gained.
変わる前と後が
Mm. It's got to do a number on you.
わからなくなりそう。もう
Ugh.
一つだけお願い。少しだけ泣いていいかな。世界が元に戻ったら今の記憶は全部いなくなっちゃうのかにゃ。
お前は過去を変える前
She does, but I think something really unique happened there to allow that.
覚えているさ。
よかった。
But Oakley should keep that in mind.
フェイリスは今日までの時間を忘れたくないにゃ。
ありがとう。
バイバイパパ。
Go on then. 0.45. Up the ladder. Up the ladder you go.
フェイリスの携帯知らないかにゃ。
Maid cafe outfit.
マユシーもわからないって言うし、残るは京馬だけなんだけどにゃ。京馬、この中のあれを見たのかにゃ。見たなら忘れるにゃ。あれは封印しておかないといけないものにゃって。京馬、今のは突っ込むところだにゃ。あれってなんだよ、あれって。で、
フェイリス。
にゃ。
こらこらこら、その手はなんだその手は。また変態行為をする気だな。
オカリン大胆。京馬とフェイリスは前世で大いなる闇と戦い愛し合った仲にゃ。深い仲なのにゃ。
Wow.
人と戦ってるね。
ひょっとしてフェイリスさんって岡部と同類。
That's a great writing choice, right? It kind of almost leaves it open-ended.
すまない。
She doesn't remember, but again,
柳林神社に
wow, that really hit me hard, man.
確かにフェイリスが奉納し、去年まではあったということだが。
Is Moika's D-mill. I'm kind of surprised they haven't kind of put that together.
どこに
Okay, so from the looks of it, the roadmap is set, right? Because now there's been a successful undoing of a D-mill, or rather a counter to a D-mill, because as I discussed in the last episode's discussion, you can't really undo the initial D-mill. That's out there. It's happened, right? It's been sent, but you can counter it, right? You have to be quite clever about it, right? It's not airtight, and it's not easy either. Not easy at all. This episode certainly shows us and puts us through it. These are brutal choices, deeply personal choices, deeply emotional choices that have to be undone, right? Or taken back. I mean, essentially, it's a case of asking the impossible, right? Asking to make an impossible choice. And, it's like I said all that time ago. You could see it. You could see how this is going to unfold. Sending these D-mills out, just firing them all over the place. That's the easy bit, right? But I knew, I mean, as you know, I've been going on and on about it. I knew, this is going to bite Ocarina in the ass, right? And it has done that tenfold. And now, the things that he has to go through and the things that he has to put others through. Yeah, it's not easy stuff, man. It's not going to be easy. And listen, this is tough, but it's going to get even tougher. It is. Like I said, deeply emotional choices, deeply meaningful choices, and personal choices at play here, and changes at play here. And at the end of the day, these are not going to be Ocarina's choices to make, as showcased in this episode, right? And I think, here in this first official attempt at actually, consciously trying to undo a D-mill, right, by trying to counter it, you see that he actually takes the right approach. I think he did a decent job of handling it, right? I mean, decent kind of isn't the right term here, right? Given again the emotional consequences of this, the emotional heft attached to the choices and the consequences of it. And the thing I'll say here is that you see that Ocarina certainly has to live with these consequences. He has to sit there. He has to understand the things that have to be undone now, because initially, they rushed into it head first, not thinking about the long-term consequences of something like this, right? And, you know, earlier I said, you know, it's going to bite Ocarina in the ass. Of course, you know, it after a certain point, it applies to the rest of them as well, right? Because he's not the only one who's sending out D-mails. But after a certain point, it's almost as if it's out of his hands, right? Especially around the time he does switch over to another timeline. There, it's really difficult for him to, at least initially, you know, explain that, no, it's too risky. It's too risky. Hell, you know, it's that episode of Ferris actually sending out that D-mail. Now I know it's more of a, I mean, it's a D-mail, but, you know, the contents of the D-mail itself are, yeah, really kind of out there, aren't they? Right? But they had to be. They simply had to be. It had to be drastic enough, substantial enough that her father does not take that trip, right? And she's the one who sends out the ransom for herself. So that's not a thing. That never happened. She didn't actually get kidnapped. But now you do kind of gain an understanding for, you know, why exactly she was so standoffish about sharing the D-mail, right? I mean, it makes a lot of sense now. You know, it would have been so difficult for her to even begin to describe the things that she's trying to put into motion here, right? And, you know, I think as far as D-mails are concerned, right here up front, it's already dealing with the ultimate, right? The ultimate angle, the ultimate choice, and that is of life and death. Choosing, right, to bring someone back to life, or putting things into motion so someone can be back into your life, right? But again, that's putting it lightly, because ultimately it is bringing someone back from the dead. You know, this idea of memory reconstruction and, you know, switching into different timelines, different world lines, not all of them have an understanding for that. You know, Ferris didn't really understand any of that around the time she sent the D-mail, right? Unless, you know, it's all this stuff that's being done off screen and, you know, they're explaining these things to other people off screen. I just don't think so. You know, that aspect of it, you know, it doesn't really explore it all that much, other than, okay, all of us know, you know, us, the audience knows that, yes, you know, he's immune to the memory reconstruction, and he is able to carry those memories at all times to different timelines. But all of that being said, this episode actually does something incredible, something mind-blowing, right? This idea, it presents this idea of others having the ability, or not having the ability, others being able to remember, right? Now, you know, of course, I'll have a whole section dedicated to that, but, you know, that's a fascinating new opening here, right? And it's a tricky one as well, that I feel has to be navigated tactfully from a writing perspective, because, you know, it could easily just come across contrived, right? Based on, you know, future use of it as well. You know, I got a firsthand experience of it here, you know, through sorry, I almost said Moeka, through Ferris, right? It's an incredible moment, right? You saw my reaction to it. You know, this idea of residual memories and, you know, dormant memories, latent memories being unlocked, you know, through stimuli, through just the right combination of words. Early days. I'm hopeful that, you know, this is going to be handled quite tactfully, right? If indeed, you know, it happens again, right? See, the thing is, I'm not even sure if it's going to happen again for others, right? But, you know, that's the reason I said, you know, Ocarina should remember this, that under the right conditions, under the right circumstance, you know, something like this is possible to almost unlock a memory that's been hidden away. And actually, it's really quite interesting, isn't it, that since the beginning, it's been presented as memories being overwritten, right? Reconstructed. At no point have they used the term deleted. I'm pretty sure, you know, that is something I would have remembered if that terminology is used, right? So yeah, from that perspective, you know, there is something really interesting to explore here. This idea that kind of begins to feel like a combination of relational memory and the stone tape theory, and ultimately perhaps just good old deja vu. And, you know, that is something I brought up a long time ago as well, right? If you'll remember, that is something I discussed, the idea of that, right? The possibility of that, residual memories and all of that, right? Being tapped into, unlocking, And I got a really, really fantastic attempt at that in this episode through Ferris. And again, I spoke of the deeply personal and emotional choices that have to be made here, the brutal choices that have to be made here. The thing is, if you try to look at it from Ferris's perspective, I mean, this idea of her having to make an impossible choice, the impossible choice, right? I mean, I suppose to an extent you can call it life or life, but there's technicalities at play here, right? Because of Ferris's own perspective on the matter, right? It's actually quite mature, emotionally mature at that as well. I mean, Ferris, you get a really good look at the real Ferris beneath all of that persona and facade. And again, like I said, earlier on in the episode, I believe I said, more than anyone else, Ferris is quite a bit like Okabe Rintaro, quite a bit like Kiyoma. They share quite a bit in common, right? So yeah, you do kind of get to see the real Ferris. And hell, you see, she tells Okabe, come on, I'm trying to be serious here. Let's drop it for a little bit. As he said something like, oh yeah, they are in black. I did notice they are all in black, decked out in black. Now, listen, before I forget, let me just kind of quickly address that aspect of this episode and get it out of the way. But yeah, earlier on in the episode, there's that segment of these, I don't know, goons, this little gang chasing down the best player, right? Ferris, the champ, and all of that. They're that, they're that agitated by this that they feel the need to, take her down. And, you kind of have to read into it, but there's, at moments it feels like, they're up to no good. Like it's really insidious, the things that they might have in mind, right? And you saw my reaction. I question, is it really that serious, bros? Really? Over this, a board game? And, given the fact that, for a few episodes now, I've been going through the death of my Yuri, and, then I had the devastating, the heartbreaking episode with Suzuha and how things played out there, right? And you've got these actual goons and Moeka that come in, they've got rifles and all of that, right? Shooting Mayuri point blank. Once you see all of that, once you experience all of that, going to these goons, right? That are essentially kind of cosplaying as well. They've got personas as well. Hell, they kind of, reminded me of, I don't know, a gang of characters out of Yu-Gi-Oh! Even, right? Battle City Tournament. God damn, that's a pull, eh? I've got a lot of fun memories of Yu-Gi-Oh! And especially that arc, the Battle City Tournament arc. Hell, now I'm probably going to go back and check it out once I get some time for it, once I get a chance. Time is at a premium, man. It really is. But yeah, it felt so out of place to me. I'll be honest, like I said, it's quite bizarre. And, like I said, let's not chew into the runtime here. Let's wrap it up. I simply could not stand that aspect of this episode. It's just so out there, So I was really quite happy that it wraps up and doesn't drag on all that much. And then it proceeds to get into the really serious stuff, right? And I loved that it can be intimate again, right? Because the last few episodes have felt quite grand, right? They have. I mean, it's always had that emotional heft to it, right? The emotional punch, the emotional resonance, ultimately. But, now it really, again, it almost kind of calls for it, this intimate approach, given the things that Okabe is trying to do here. Okabe plus, Karisu as well, who's in on it, right? Who's been given, time after time, she's given a rundown of the whole thing, and she's almost always immediately on board because she's able to understand it, right? She's able to follow just the gist of it and the flow of it, right? Piece by piece. And at the end of the day, Okabe Rintaro is so lucky that he has someone like Makise Karisu on his side, right? Helping him. Because listen, if there's no Makise Karisu there as kind of like a safety net for Okabe, he would have been lost, right? He really would have been lost, and it would have been nearly impossible for him to really kind of climb back up. And the thing is, it's not lost on Okabe either. He understands just how important Karisu is, right? He thanks her again here, right before, the time leap kicks in, right? And, you know, as I pointed out, it's quite an interesting dynamic because for Okabe, this dynamic, this relationship, you know, between the two of them, it's developed quite a bit, right? Because again, he retains all of his memories of all of it, but Kurisu does not, right? A lot of times, some of these experiences get cut off into a different timeline. But I think, you know, her understanding of the things that Okabe is going through, you know, through the time leap aspect of it, that understanding gives her quite a bit of, I don't know, understanding for the experiences and the things that Okabe has to say, you know, be it through the cadence, be it through his delivery, be it through his demeanor, his disposition, all of that. She can just tell, you know, he's been through it. She said as much on the rooftop as well after he time leaps in the beginning of the episode, right? After, you know, he gets a confirmation that indeed it's just been delayed. Mayuri has not been saved, but, you know, kind of countering a D-mill has given him an extra day, right? Now, you know, that kind of almost builds on it, doesn't it? You know, countering this D-mill, right? Does that mean that, you know, it's kind of added another day or two to Mayuri's life, right? Before inevitably that scene takes place, right? Of her dying. But yeah, you know, going back to my point about Makise understanding Okabe and the things that he's going through on the rooftop, she understood. She understood that this man's been, he's been in the living hell essentially, right? To hell and back and there again. So she understands, you know, and you see how incredibly devastated she is as well at the notion of it, that, you know, Okabe is going through all of this. So yeah, you know, even though she forgets some of these things because of, you know, the D-mail aspect of it, the memory reconstruction aspect of it, or even, you know, the time leap aspect of it, she has such emotional intelligence that she can just kind of put things together anyways, based on Okabe, right? Based on his output, based on the things that he's describing, based on the fact that he goes to her for help, right? He calls her Kurisu. And again, you see that Okabe is just immediately beginning to go to Kurisu at this point, right? So just these little things, they can tell, they can communicate quite a bit to Kurisu. And again, it's Makise Kurisu who kind of latches onto this idea, right? And presents this hypothesis that only a few of the D-mails they sent change the world lines, right? So you've got the Lotto one, the Moeka one, Ruka's D-mail, Ferris, and then the whole, you know, Suzuha one, follow assistant, right? And then she continues that undoing the one about tailing Amane-san delayed the raid by a day, right? And she proceeds to say, you know, so maybe if you could undo each D-mail in reverse order, then maybe you have something there. And then maybe you can return to the original timeline that does have the IBN 5100, or the IBN 5100 is present, right? And again, from an audience member perspective, that's the one before Moeka sends her D-mail, right? Again, bamboozling them. And, you know, I think it's a little bit bizarre. You know, I kind of touched up on it right at the end of the episode. You know, a lot has happened since, especially, you know, looking at it from Okabe's perspective. You know, that betrayal, right? It's such an emotionally devastating betrayal for all of them. And then, you know, Okarin as well, you know, seeing those goons run in, and then of course, you know, Moeka coming in as well, right? And then being the one to shoot Mayuri. Yes, you know, there's always another side to a story, perhaps, you know, she's got her reasons. And, you know, I've touched up on that, of course, in the discussion for that episode. Let's see how all of that plays out. But the point is, he understands the betrayal. He knows that Moeka betrayed them, right? That she's this spy and all that she was keeping track of all of them. So, you know, why exactly is Okabe not just putting it together that, okay, yeah, she's the one who betrayed us, so everything she's done has been for this, right? To get on the inside. And the one thing that she's been asking about nonstop, IBN 5100, can I borrow it? She even tries to just steal it outright, right? Even though it's presented in a comedic fashion or manner, she does try to steal it, right? Around the time she is a part of the lab, around the time she actually belongs to a group of people, right? that are actually so open to all of this, that are so welcoming to all of this. Yes, maybe at the time, internally, she might have thought these are such naive people that they don't even suspect anything, right? A single thing about me. But if you look at it, but if you do look at it from the other perspective, it's that these are people. This is a collection of people that are just warm and welcoming, and that are able to kind of give someone a benefit of the doubt, right? Because again, it's made up of a lot of unique people coming together, being allowed to come together, being allowed to join something, to be a part of something, right? And she had that. The scene of Mayuri taking her hand is always so vivid in my mind, always, right? And then showing her around, and even there, those side eyes that she's giving, and just looking at Mayuri, taking photos of Mayuri, and the fridge and all of that. Yeah, I mean, I keep thinking that at this point Okabe should kind of put it together that okay, she clearly betrayed them there at that point as well, and sending that D-mail, she bamboozled them. But going back to Makise presenting this idea, this undertaking, and it's essentially bang on. She's bang on, but again, realistically, she's still kind of a little bit standoffish about really kind of diving into this head first. But again, she's a really intelligent person. She is, and resourceful, and all of that, right? A prodigy. So the moment she's saying that, the thing I really loved here is that, all of a sudden there's life just through that shot of Okurin's eyes almost lighting up, right? You see the change there just through that moment, that little piece of animation there. You just see that all of a sudden there's this spark for hope, right? Because he's sitting up top on that roof. You see, again, he's devastated. He's got no ideas. He's back at square one, and that right there, you saw how much it hit me, man, over the span of these past few episodes, and the things that Okurin has experienced as well, to then just kind of return to square one. Oh, that's a loss. It just feels like such a loss, doesn't it? Right? And Okurin carries that loss with him, those experiences, right? Lost to just time. He carries those. Yet now it feels like he's back to square one. And that really hit me, man. Just the magnitude of all the experiences that happened, and the incredible things that happened, now just being lost, right? But, going back to that moment I mentioned, it's just incredible, isn't it? Just how much just one little piece of animation, just a shift in those eyes, right? Those eyes lighting up. You see the spark. You just feel it. I mean, that's how you do it, man. That's how you communicate it. In a subtle manner at that moment. I felt it, man. I truly sat there and felt hope, right? Hope all of a sudden within Okurin that, oh my God, she's onto something here. This actually could be something, right? Because they've seen it play out now, right? Even though it wasn't by design, right? He understood after, Kurisu kind of, voiced it and put it out there step by step, that undoing it, again, technicalities on that, ultimately countering the Suzuha D-mail, it allowed for this, right? Again, the divergence meter is going back up as well, right? So up the ladder you go. And then, of course, over the span of this episode, and by the end of it, they have executed, the first attempt, successfully executed the first attempt at, again, countering a D-mail or the effects of a D-mail. Right. So now, the roadmap is clear. But that being said, all roads ultimately lead to the monumental first D-mail. Bad news. Someone has stabbed Makise Kurisu, or I think someone has stabbed Makise Kurisu, right? Yeah. Sooner or later, Okurin is going to find himself facing that, right? Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit surprising that he still hasn't really thought of it, right? Yes, a lot is going on. He's got a lot on his mind. I mean, he's got so much on his mind, right? So much more than any normal person should have on their mind. Again, given his own curse of carrying all these memories and experiences that others forget. But again, there's some interesting things at play in this episode as well, in terms of, possibly tapping into these memories that still kind of exist deep within. But yeah, one thing I'm sure of, the hits are going to keep coming. And, the moment he actually finally realizes that, yeah, the first D-mill and the things that led to the first D-mill are of that magnitude, that might just devastate him to another level once again, right? I mean, yeah, that's bound to be something just incredible. And, I've discussed this and speculated about this idea of, each of these distinct, alpha and beta having this life and death situation. On one end, you've got Mayuri and her inevitable death, right? Unless you make enough changes, unless you, perhaps reach that 1% divergence, right? That's how Suzaha put it as well, right? Maybe then she can be saved. I mean, I think she said probably, right? So, it's not as simple as just getting to the world line in which you do have access to the IBM 5100 again. I don't think that's going to be enough here, is it? Because, from a writing perspective, you can see the clash, the dynamics at play here. It is putting Ocarina in a situation. It is going to put him in a situation that is going to be a rock and a hard place, right? And I saw a bit of that here, present here, through Ferris and the choice she had to make. Her father or her best friend or a really good friend in Mayuri. But again, going back to the whole alpha and beta aspect of it, and they added a new term, or Makise rather added a new term that she, of course, heard from Suzaha herself. The alpha attractor field. I'm pretty certain they did not mention that before. Now, I'm not saying, that's some kind of thing that oh my God, this new term, it makes no sense. I'm not sure if that's really my read on it. But, the way it's presented, it doesn't make it seem like, oh, this is something I should immediately know about, right? But it is something that they are using for the first time. Suzaha did not use that term around the time she first begins to explain these things to them, right? Around the time she's taking them to her time machine. Feature Gadget 204 and all of that. There, she didn't say attractor field. She just said alpha and beta, right? And that they have to get back to the beta. But I suppose, that's a little bit later, right? That's kind of almost like endgame thought process. For now, both Ocarina and I can just kind of look at the next rung on the ladder, essentially, right? The next one is, my goodness, the next one is Ruka. I mean, speaking of deeply emotional and deeply personal choices being made through these D-mails, I mean, this next one that he does have to counter, it's going to be quite a sensitive one. And that puts it lightly, man. That just, wow. I mean, just even thinking about first steps in terms of addressing it, in terms of, bringing it to Ruka's attention, it's going to have to be so different than the approach that he took here, right? Yeah, I mean, I did say that thing about, okay, this is something Ocarina should remember, this idea of, residual memories and all of that, possibly being, unlocked, right? Freed in a sense, perhaps because of his proximity, his close proximity to them. And perhaps in addition to that, a few other things at play as well that I'll, get into a little bit later. But, the thing is, say Ruka does remember, right? It's not about to make it easy or anything, that might actually make it even more difficult, much like how remembering here makes it that much more difficult, right? But the thing is, it's kind of a part of it, isn't it? Ferris remembering, having memories of that, of losing her father and, just the deeply hurtful notion of living with, those being her final words to her father, even though her father didn't take it as such. He knows this is just, a toddler or maybe a little bit older than a toddler. So they don't really quite, or she doesn't really quite understand the thing that she's saying here, right? So he didn't take it seriously. Of course he didn't. But, again, just knowing that that's the final thing you said and having to live with that, that's quite a thing, isn't it? But yeah, let's kind of begin to explore the Ferris perspective of this episode and, the Ferris and Ocarina perspective of this episode. So yeah, I get to see that here. She actually is a professional, right? She's a pro RideNet player and she's the best, right? I mean, they've already kind of shown us that she's essentially the best, but there she had the maid cafe. That's her thing. She can't really devote all that time to being a professional Rhinet player, but here she did have the time to pursue it at a professional level, right? To become a pro, and then of course, draw the attention of many of these people that have dark hearts, right? As she put it a little bit later on. Of course, Daru knew exactly, where she is at the moment, and he tells Ocarina as much. And the thing I really like there is that you notice a Metalupa. The Metalupa is on that billboard, on that screen, the big screen outside of the stadium or outside of that building. In universe, they've kind of shown me on a couple of occasions now that the Metalupa is kind of like a big deal in terms of a prize as a collector's item and all of that, right? And then in the background on the banner, I saw the writing that felt so familiar, right? It's the same writing they use for the intros, not the intros, the title cards, right? This one being made in complex. So yeah, from that point on, there's the chase sequence and all of that. I spoke of it. I gave my thoughts on it. Really, really quite happy that it didn't take much longer. It didn't take more up, or it didn't take up more of the runtime of the episode. Just really bizarre and out of place, in my opinion. Just did not like that segment one bit. Though I did like one aspect of it, I suppose, a thing that it allowed, I suppose, kind of getting to go down memory lane once again, in the sense that I get to see a lot of familiar locations that I've seen before already, right? The streets, the alleys, the shops, right? The dark alleys, and all of that. I've seen different characters have different experiences in these moments, in these places specifically. And the thing is, this idea of places, familiar places and all of that, it is something I am going to incorporate into my discussion about, residual memories and all of that. This potential idea of places holding energy, right? More on that in a bit. But of course, throughout the chase sequence, there's these pauses, right? And you get really interesting exchanges going on there, right? And again, the most significant one being this idea that Ocarina mentioned the name, right? May Queen. And this right here really gets her attention because she said no one else even knew about this name, that she never even told her dad the potential name of the idea that, she brought up and then, was kind of turned down on. Then Ocarina really goes in that indeed the maid cafe does exist or did exist, and that, she loved it more than anyone else. And, the whole landscape of the area was different because of it, because of the introduction of Moe culture and everything else that's kind of attached to it and kind of adjacent to that culture. And then, you begin to get those exciting moments of those flashes, right? There's that really tight shot of her eyes. I mean, it's almost kind of haunting, isn't it? As, you see deep within, things are being unlocked, right? Latent or dormant memories, right? Stuff that wasn't completely overridden, I suppose. I mean, I suppose at the end of the day, it's not airtight because, again, at the end of the day, this is human memories and human consciousness and all of that, right? How could it truly all just disappear without a trace, right? Now, before I go any further, I should establish my stance, right? That I don't really think this is meant to be kind of like a low levels of reading Steiner being unlocked within Ferris. I don't think that's a thing here. Or I just don't think that's the angle that's being taken here. I think, reading Steiner is something unique to Ocarina. But perhaps, a combination of a few things allowed for this. And like I said a little bit earlier, a combination of these words that mean something, right? That truly mean something. It is a unique situation. And then, of course, beyond the words, he actually takes her on location. He takes her to that physical place, right? That was essentially, HQ for the maid cafe and all of that. He took her within the place. He took her inside, right? And now, there's another aspect to it, right? This whole idea I brought up at the beginning of the episode, or beginning of the discussion rather, of, places potentially holding energy. And ultimately, the combination of these really specific things that Ocarina has to say, the words, rather, and the actual place itself, right? Putting her within that space. And again, being quite descriptive about the whole thing, right? And the things that took place there, and the bonds that were formed there, all of that led to something being unlocked, right? Within Ferris. And it's an incredible moment. It really is. This idea that certain places retain and hold memories, right? The notion of, stepping into a building of any sort, right? Or walking through a landscape and feeling this inexplicable sense of, I don't know, heaviness, right? Sadness, joy. And that perhaps under the right conditions, these imprints, if you will, may be replayed, right? Strong emotions such as suffering or death or even deep passion, right? I think this one right here, deep passion, is the one that kind of lines up with Ferris and the main cafe, I think, right? These emotions kind of facilitating the imprints ultimately, right? The echoes of the past, if you will. Though again, this is a rather unique setup here, given that, it's not really the past, is it? It's just a different timeline. Memories of a different timeline. Memories of a different lived experience, right? That's another constant. The idea, the notion of a lived experience, right? Lived memories, and then memories gained, right? And then those two kind of blurring the lines and kind of doing a bit of a number on her as well, right? The dissonance of having lived different lives, right? And those memories gained and lived just clashing within, to the point that Ferris isn't even really able to distinguish between the two anymore, right? Or she's having great difficulty in doing so, to the point that, again, I called it, to me, it really truly was kind of beginning to feel like a lucid dream, the way she describes her lived experience of this, right? Something that she understands that she kind of has to wake up from now, right? And I mean, that's the exact line of dialogue as well. I said, yeah, it feels like a lucid dream that she feels like she must wake up from now, right? And then she follows up by essentially saying that exact thing a little bit later on. But that right there is so interesting as well, isn't it? Her understanding and acceptance of this, right? That there is a distinction between actual lived reality, or accepting your actual lived reality, right? Be it, Ferris's father tragically dying, be it Ruka being born a biological male, be it Suzaha, leaving on that night, letting things be, playing out to the natural conclusion rather than stepping in and, altering that natural conclusion, right? Be it for your own personal gain or your own personal, ego or selfish reasons and all of that, right? It's actually really interesting how Ferris handles this. Like I said earlier, really emotionally strong. Ferris, that is, because at no point does she try to delude herself into, maybe trying to float that idea, okay, why can't this be the new reality? In this reality, my father is alive. Right from the beginning, you could just see it. You can just see it in her demeanor that she knows this is not real, or at least this is not how things are meant to be, right? These 10 years, this incredible dream that she's been living, right? Had a chance to live. Ultimately, it's not natural. There is something just not natural about it, and that she must accept how things really are, how things really truly played out. And unfortunately, it's her dad tragically passing on. And ultimately, she does end up trading fantasy for reality. Now, the thing is, right before the D-mail is sent, she asked Ocarine, since I remember now, am I going to remember after you send this new D-mail? You see that Ocarine almost immediately steps in and tells her, yeah, if you remember the things now, yeah, of course, surely you'll remember after I send this new D-mail. I don't think that Ocarine actually believed that, right? I don't think he actually truly believed that. He just kind of said it, because of course, why not, right? At that moment in time, he's not going to find himself being really rather blunt or anything, right? Though, to be fair, I don't think even Ocarine truly knew for sure until, it happens, that ultimately she's not going to remember, right? Now, yes, it's like I said, it's a great writing choice. It kind of leaves it open-ended, but my read on the situation is that the moment, the reading Saturn does take effect, and then, the moment Ferris is, shown back on screen, I could just see then and there that no, she does not remember. And that's one of the main reasons it hits you so hard. I mean, that's one of the reasons it hit me so hard, because it's clear that she does not remember. And it's just clear that all of that is just kind of, I don't know, once again, lost time, right? And I think it's the same reason Ocarina is really kind of sad in that moment as well. He after she does her thing, she's back to normal, I suppose, back in form. Though again, ultimately it is a bit of a persona and facade that she puts on. And that is another thing I kind of want to focus on a bit more in a bit. But yeah, the moment he saw that and he understood that, yeah, all of that, all those moments that they had, all those moments she spent with her dad and all of those things gone. And as you saw, I mean, it really took me by surprise. It hit me hard, man, really hard. Just the notion of the whole thing taking place in that manner. And, again, I think the score, the beautiful, melancholic, and haunting piece of music that's actually accompanying that scene, actually, I mean, maybe not haunting, but haunting in a sense, but something about that piece of music just, it hits you, man, like a truck. I mean, the whole sequence is just incredibly moving, man. It really is. Just brought me to tears. And yeah, it hurt. It actually really hurt to watch it play out. And in that moment, you can see that Okabe is hurt as well. He feels it. But yeah, going back to my point, it's a clever bit of writing, this idea of almost leaving it open-ended. But realistically speaking, yes, she does not remember. But, the things that she has to say, it's just such a happy coincidence, isn't it? Given that she herself is really quite similar to, Hohen Kiyoma, right? And the larger-than-life personality. So just by chance, she happens to say something like, oh, they faced a darkness together and that they used to be lovers in a former life. So, for that reason, they have a bond, a connection. And you see that Makisa Kirisu, there is a tinge of jealousy there, I'd say, and this is right after Okabe kind of grabs her by the shoulders and he's got a really serious look on his face, right? You see she kind of hunches down and she said something, right? I love the cadence of it. Ora, ora. Stop just grabbing everyone, And Mayuri's like, oh, Okarina's so bold. But let me kind of quickly touch up on, perhaps some of the romantic angle that is kind of explored, before the D-mail is sent, back at Ferris's residence, right? That heart-to-heart that they do have. I really kind of get to see the true Ferris on display. You do kind of get to see that she is attracted to Okabe, that she has taken to Okabe, perhaps, because of the things that played out, yes, it was a little bit goofy, it was a little bit bizarre, but he does put his life at risk, right? Ultimately leading to her calling him, her prince, and she blushes on a few occasions. And yeah, that's actually a strong component, a big component of this idea of asking about, oh, am I going to remember all of these? Because I don't want to forget the time I spent with you, right? So listen, I'll be honest, I could have done without that. I think it would have been just as meaningful if they didn't bring in the romantic angle, essentially. Because I know that romantic angle is about to be at play again in the next one, right? In the next D-mail that has to be countered, and that being Ruka's. I've known since the beginning, right, that Ruka has a crush on Okabe. It's been really quite clear. So yeah, it is kind of beginning to lean into the harem aspect of it again. And, they have such a great dynamic, don't they? It's a really unique dynamic. And, for that reason, I'm really quite happy I get to see much more of Ferris in this episode, right? Because she does bring a really unique and fun energy to the whole thing, even though I get to see the really serious Ferris as well. But, after the D-mail, they have the type of bond and dynamic, where she can just, goof around and even just, joke about being lovers in a past life and all of that. And it just feels just normal that this is just the type of friendship that they do have, and it doesn't have to be something romantic. They can just, talk about it, or she can just, jokingly flirt about that. I mean, like I said, these two share quite a bit in common, right? Kindred spirits. You truly get that feeling in this episode as well, throughout this episode. But, earlier on in the anime, and, it still might be true. It really could be, it could be a combination of things, even though I got quite a distinct confirmation about, why exactly, the Kiyoma persona exists, right, in relation to, Mayuri, his best friend, his childhood friend and all of that. But, I also still believe that it is a part of him kind of shielding himself, right? I think I called it a defense mechanism, right? That most definitely applies to Ferris, in my opinion, right? It is a defense mechanism. This whole persona she puts on. It's super entertaining, of course, to have that type of character and, just that type of energy being introduced into a group dynamic. But, you really get to see, because of this episode or throughout this episode, that, yeah, it's not really truly Ferris, is it? The real Ferris. And I think that right there actually is one of the main reasons as to why she's just always on board with the Kiyoma persona, right? That she's always game to play along and, kind of almost top it or match it, right? She'll bring her own, really strange banter and strange, storytelling abilities to it as well to match it, right? She'll go, bar for bar, essentially. And that is simply because she has a great understanding for, what this actually is, this Kiyoma persona of his, right? Because she herself does the same thing. And then, of course, both Ocarina and I kind of get to see the switch up, right? She wants to be serious, but then, yeah, it is a sad thought, isn't it? It's a heartbreaking thought, actually. And you see Ocarina, he's actually quite astonished by it, right? There's a tight shot of his face, just shocked or surprised at her demeanor the next day in the morning, right? She comes in, and this is essentially a few minutes before this incredible monumental thing is about to take place, right? This D-mill is about to go out, and her father is about to be dead again. Yet she comes in full on Ferris, right? Maid Cafe Ferris, in good spirits and all of that. I mean, putting on an act, of course, but you see that Ocarina is just baffled, right? Ultimately, it's to protect herself. And that right there is such an indicator of just how much it hurts, just how hurtful all of this is, right? To have to go through this process. And, for that reason, she's locked in. She's got the full-on Maid Cafe Ferris persona on display. And then you do kind of get to see a glimpse of her dropping it momentarily right before, Ocarina sends the D-mail, right? And it's a great shot as well. You see the phone out of focus on the right end of the frame, and on the left side you see quite a dejected and sad, and that just feels like an understatement. But yeah, you see quite a devastated Ferris just standing there, right? That's the final thing he sees before reading Steiner takes effect. And like I mentioned a little bit earlier, right, I really enjoyed this approach, the really intimate approach to all of this, in comparison to, again, the really, distinct and shocking nature of some of the things that have been happening, be it the striking death of Mayuri and, being put through that cycle over and over again, and the shocking events and revelations of how things played out for Suzuha, to then go to something like this, right? At this stage of the story as well, right? To something a bit more contemplative and meditative, right? In its approach, in its execution, facing and understanding the consequences and sitting with these consequences, right? In this setting, and really having to be a part of it for essentially a day and night. And I'm speaking from, Ocarina's perspective here. And all of it just lingering, right? This time, it's not really like a breathless approach. Now he really truly had to sit with how things are about to play out here, right? So I really, really appreciated that in the tone of this and in the approach of this episode. And it's an interesting one, isn't it? Right? The matchup of it, that, this is the approach that they take with Ferris. And it's not just about, sitting with the consequences of the things that have been put into motion. It's also about responsibility as well, because of course Ocarina must be thinking at this point that, this, reckless behavior or attitude towards, D-mails and, potentially tampering with time and things that are kind of set in time as well. These are harsh lessons, but lessons nonetheless. And perhaps another silver lining of all of this is that, yes, even if if all of them don't actually remember many of these things after, reading Steiner takes effect, you see that through these experiences, Ocarine is gaining a better understanding for these friends of his, right? Even better than before, right? So he is going to have a newfound respect for Ferris. He does have a newfound respect for Ferris after all of this, right? You see it almost immediately as he approaches her, right? In those moments. That might feel strange to everyone else, but I completely understand, him just looking at Ferris and, just grabbing her by the shoulders. And I think it is going to follow that trajectory, right? The same thing is going to happen with Ruka. And then, of course, beyond that point as well. Hell, perhaps even Moeka. Moeka. I mean, I touched up on it, but yeah, Moeka has her reasons. Everyone's got their own struggles and all of that, right? It's just that, at the moment, it's a tough pill to swallow, right? Because she's the one who came and ultimately pulled the trigger, right? The first trigger, the first time it happened, at least. Though, since then, it's been clear to both Ocarina and I that it doesn't even have to be Moeka pulling the trigger to kill Mayuri, right? It's meant to happen anyways, and it does happen anyways, in many different ways. But, going all the way back to this idea of, residual memories and all of that, lingering, dormant memories hidden away until triggered by a unique stimuli. It's such a fascinating concept, isn't it? And I'm cautious, but I'm cautiously optimistic as well about how exactly this is going to be explored further. I certainly hope it's being explored much further as well. And hell, maybe it could end with some kind of mind-blowing revelation as well. I jokingly said a glitch in the Matrix because that's how it kind of felt in the moment. But you never know, man. Who knows the type of revelation that I could get at some point about, just the nature of the memory reconstruction aspect of it. And, this whole idea of alpha and beta and all of that, it could get really sci-fi on me. It really could. But yeah, this idea of it being triggered by unique stimuli, be it a memento, right? A significant memento or a meaningful memento at that, or an incident, or even simple conversation that can jog that memory, that really specific memory. And that's exactly how it happened, right? Ocarine begins to describe really specific things. And, earlier on, I mentioned the idea of relational memory and then, the stone tape theory. And again, just at the most basic level, deja vu, right? It really just could be a case of that as well. But, it's being presented as a bit more than that. There's certainly possibility for a bit more than just deja vu. Really specific signals being expressed that go right back to the same part of the brain as before, right? And, perhaps the episodic memory component of it, revealing really specific life episodes. And of course, in Ferris's case, these really specific life episodes, happen to be her connection with the maid cafe and Moe culture and all of that, right? It's that meaningful. It really truly was that meaningful for Ferris. But yeah, ultimately, Ferris's handling of the whole thing is really quite commendable, isn't it? It's really quite impressive, actually. Like I said, emotional maturity at play. The emotional maturity that's on display is rather impressive. Listen, man, if I put myself in her shoes, I'm not sure if I can make the same choice, man. If you're talking about a parent just disappearing, right? And you kind of getting those memories back and knowing that they've been gone for all that time, but then you kind of had them back in your life. I don't know, man. And I'm sure many of you might struggle with the same choice as well, right? I don't know, man. I'm not sure if I could make the same choice as Ferris in that moment. But, quickly, another really unique dynamic at play here is, Ocarine kind of getting to experience how someone is going to handle a choice, an impossible choice at that, right? And, getting to kind of experience Ferris's handling of it, it's an interesting experience for Ocarine as well. And, even in the editing choices, you see that a lot of times he'll cut to Ocarine in some of these definitive moments. One of them that comes to mind immediately is that, she's talking about how she got to spend, these 10 extra years that she should not have had the chance to. And she cherishes those 10 years, right? But now it's time to kind of, go back to reality. And that ultimately, Mayushi is my friend and I can't be selfish at a time like this. That's just, my goodness. I keep saying the emotional maturity of Ferris is just commendable, but that right there is incredible, isn't it? Right? that I cannot be selfish at a time like this. And at that exact moment, it cuts to Ocarine, right? A tight shot of Ocarine's expression. So yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? This idea of, not being selfish. And, Ferris having a complete understanding for that, right? Even though it's clear that she's carried this for a long chunk of her life. This idea that the last thing she said to her father before he died was that, that I hope you die. Again, as a kid, but that's not going to make that much of a distinction in her own mind, right? And she ultimately makes the choice to go back to that, of carrying that with her for the rest of her life. That's mental fortitude. But yeah, I think that should do it for this one, folks. I mean, ultimately, yeah, actually ends up being quite a strong episode, right? It had me in the first half, or just that component, that segment of, these, just these guys, this gang from the Rhineland competition, that gave me a bit of concern. But then it recovers, and it ends up actually being quite fantastic. It really does. It's a return for Ferris after a long time, after a prolonged absence. And, as you know, quite a puzzling absence in my opinion as well. But, I think she's given a great episode. But, I'm not sure if this is it for Ferris. It might be. But yeah, if you enjoyed that, consider dropping a like, consider dropping some comments, give me your thoughts. If you are interested in early access to the next few episodes right now, or timer-based full length or full opacity, no opacity masks, just crisp footage. If you're interested in any of those things, consider checking out the Patreon page and potentially supporting the channel as well in the process of it all. The links are in the description and the pinned comment, also links to social media if that's your thing. But please do remember, social media, or Twitter specifically, it's not just meant to be me posting about anime. It's meant to be me posting about anything and everything that I'm into. So please don't expect just anime stuff. Right then, thank you so much for joining me, folks, and thank you for your time, because time is precious. It really is. And I do hope to see you again soon for episode 18. Until then, take it easy.